Hello and welcome to the Colorless and Land portion of the limited set review for Bloomburrow. Those are the cards I'm going to be talking about today. Generally, pretty quick one. Generally, there's not tons to talk about. There's some interesting ones in this set. There's more stuff going on than I think usually in this section of the videos. If you haven't been here for one of my set reviews, this is how I do things. I have 5 tiers. Tier 1 is good. Tier 5 is bad. It's a little different than maybe the way other people do it. It facilitates more room for discussion. I like it. It's for me. At the end of the day, these are for me. If you like them, great. Glad you liked them. Feel free to stick around. There's tons more of them. Subscribe and all that. Bark Form Harvester. 3 colorless mana, 2/3. Changeling, Reach, and you can pay 2 mana to put a card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. The Samuel H. Black Memorial, or not in Memorial, honorary Samuel H. Black text creature for each set. I think he was given the design space for those particular cards. But yeah, I don't actually hate this. So there's a lot of type stuff going on in the set, and this works with all the type stuff and has reach. So I think you could. This is the most playable this version of that card is. The format doesn't seem slow enough to me to warrant it, but I think that the card itself is more powerful than this style of card usually is on its face. But yeah, still not running to play it. Bumbleflower's Sharepot. 2 colorless mana for an artifact. When it enters, create a food token, and you can pay 5 to sacrifice it to destroy target non-land permanent, activate only as a sorcery. So normally I hate these kind of effects, but there's a couple of things I like about this. Obviously, the couple of things that I like about it are how much, it costs a little, so it still costs 7, right? They've printed versions of this that are 1 and 6. This is 2 and 5. That's a lot easier of a spread of mana, because 5 mana to destroy something. This kind of looks like Spiked Pit Trap from AFR to me, where, now that was 1 mana, and you could pay 5 to deal 5 damage. This is 7 mana total, but you get a food and you can hit any non-land permanent. So I think I kind of like this. I think you actually are going to play this in some decks. Another thing that's interesting about it is there's a couple of cards in green that allow you to recur non-land permanents. So for foraging, and this helps you facilitate foraging on the front side, and then on the back side you could get this back with the foraging, kind of like a thing. There's a thing you can do there that I actually kind of like, and I'm interested to see how this one plays out. I actually do kind of like it. I actually think this is going to see some play in limited in some decks. Fountainport Bell. Single colorless mana for an artifact. When it enters, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, and put that card on top. And you can pay 1 and sacrifice it and draw a card. So this is a better version of Traveler's Amulet, because you can choose in the late game to cycle it for not a land if you want, which is nice. And in the early game, it basically behaves exactly the same. It's actually slightly better than Traveler's Amulet on turn 1, too, because you can play this on 1. If you had a 2-drop that required the color of mana that you need to go get, you can actually play that on turn 2 instead of having to wait till turn 3 to play it. So this is actually better than Traveler's Amulet. People will get mad at me if I say strictly better, but yeah, it's kind of strictly better than Traveler's Amulet. It's an upgrade. It just has more flexibility. There's more things you can do with it. Traveler's Amulet's a card that sees play in pretty much I think all the formats that it's been in limited for. It's seen play and been a solid fixing tool, and I think that this will be very similar. It's a good fixer if you need it. Very interesting one. Heirloom Epic. Colorless mana for an artifact. 4 tap to draw a card. For each mana in this ability's activation cost, you may tap an untapped creature you control rather than pay that mana. Activate only as a sorcery. So this is basically Convoke on your activated ability, which is kind of cool. It's also only 1 mana. The problem is your go wide decks don't really want this, because you want to, usually in those decks you want to go wide, attack, smash, you know what I mean? This card doesn't help you do that. But how cheap does it have to be for this to be good? If this was 2 mana, it would probably be good. So you need to have 2 creatures that you're willing to tap every turn to make this work, and it's only 1 mana up front. And there's a bunch of cards in the set that make 2 creatures when they enter the battlefield. So Jonah's Codex type vibes. It's a lot cheaper, and maybe I should bump this up. Maybe I should bump this up to tier 3 because, again, like when I was going through and grading the cards the first time, as I do, I thought about putting this in tier 3. I was like, oh man, it's like right on the borderline between tier 3 and tier 4. Like, is this going to be a card that you can actually play and it's going to be like pretty decent in the decks you want it in? I'm just worried about how slow it's going to be. I'm just a little bit worried that it's a little off theme and a little slow, and there's just better ways to do this. But it is only like, again. So if this is 2 mana to draw a card plus tap 2 creatures, I think that would be pretty good. And sometimes it's like 0 mana. And like you can just pay 4. Like sometimes you just pay 4. Like you're allowed to just pay 4. If you want to pay 4, you can pay 4. You know what? I'm gonna bump it up. I'm gonna bump it up. I did it. Don't say I ever didn't do anything for you. Yeah. I mean, I think it's like kind of just gonna draw you a whole bunch of cards. Like I kind of think so. Like, how good is Maze Mind Tome in Limited? Very good. It drew you like 4 cards, or you allowed to, or got to scry, and you gained 4 life. This is clearly worse than that card, but it's got similar kind of vibes of like Reckoner Bankbuster. Again, I don't think it's as good as Reckoner Bankbuster, which wasn't even that good in Limited. It was like a tier 2 card. This is like a tier. I think this is clearly worse, but I just feel like there's enough stuff that makes tokens that. And you know what's interesting? Again, similar to Convoke, you can tap them the turn you play them. So if you make 2 tokens on like turn 4 or something, or turn 5, you can like play a 2-drop, tap the 2-drop, pay 3 mana, draw a card. Yeah, I think this is going to get there. I think this is actually a real deck. I think this is actually a real thing you can do. Patchwork Banner. Similar story here. 3 colorless mana for an artifact. When it enters, choose a creature type. Creatures of the chosen type get +1/+1. Creatures you control. And you can tap to add 1 mana of any color. So, I mean, this isn't an Anthem, but it's close. In this set, it's going to be like you're going to have a creature type that you probably want to name more often than not, and it's going to work with that. And then the Manolith is fine. Now the problem is, again, it has all the Manolith problems of, well, it's 3 mana, and then like your decks that wanted it, it's like, is it that good? You don't really want to be super aggressive, but it does help with that if you're like very type focused. So I can see a lot of decks like kind of wanting, like a lot of different decks sort of kind of wanting it, and I think it should be pretty good. It's actually, I think this plus this is kind of like, is this a thing? Is this kind of like what we're like? Is this, are we cooking here? Get more mana to draw more cards off your thing, and then you're just kind of you get this little thing going here. Short Bow. 2 colorless mana for an equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has vigilance and reach. And it is equipped for 1. So you've seen Short Sword, which is 1 mana +1/+1. And that's not been good enough. Similarly, 1 mana white and 1 to equip for +1/+1 and vigilance has not been good enough. I think adding reach for a whole other mana up front is not going to be good enough. And I think even with Valiant, this is not going to be what you want. If it were 1 mana, I would be interested. I would be very interested. It's not 1 mana, it's 2 mana. Again, the Valiant triggers, a lot of the Valiant triggers aren't like value oriented, so you can't do the like, oh, I'm gonna like draw a card off of this, or like whatever. You can't do the Nadu thing, basically, of like equipping your thing a bunch of times and like getting Valiant triggers and just trying to outvalue your opponent. That's not really what Valiant's trying to do. And so I think for that reason, this doesn't really appeal to me. Starforged Sword. 4 colorless mana for a equipment. You can gift a tap fish. When it enters, if the gift was promised, attach it to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +3/+3 and loses flying, and it is equipped for 3. So if you don't gift this, you're paying 7 mana to equip something. That's a disaster. And if you do gift it, you're giving your opponent a fish, which is also a disaster. So the joke with this is that you can play it in your like blue Flyers deck that cares about creatures not having flying, and then it's an upside. I don't know. I'm not seeing it. This seems really expensive to me. Giving your opponent a fish to equip your equipment seems like a disaster. So, yeah, I think this is just not good. Tangle Tumbler. 3 mana for a 6/6 vehicle with Vigilance. You can pay 3 and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. And you can tap 2 untap tokens you control, and it becomes a artifact creature until end of turn. Now, what I didn't think about the first time I read this is that this works with food tokens. And it has Vigilance. But that doesn't really have Vigilance, because, like, you have to tap the token, so you are kind of tapping something. So you don't really have... Like, it has Vigilance, but does it have Vigilance? You know what I mean? And it does have, like, an ability to do something, even when it's not attacking. I don't know. I think this is probably still... It's just not having the ability to crew it ever is, I think, tough. It is big. And it is kind of like... Oh, I have made these 1/1 tokens, and now I can't attack because my opponent played a 3/3. I guess I can attack with my 6/6 thing. But if you don't have any tokens, it's a disaster because it can't do anything. I'm going to leave it down here. I think it's just kind of got too many... I think it's got a couple too many problems. I mean, it is big, too, but, like, just the... I think if you had, like, every card... If every creature card in your deck made a token, you could play this and it would be probably good. And I do think there's going to be some decks where maybe that's going to be possible. This is a really tough one. I'm going to leave it in tier 4 and get punished. 3-Tree Mascot. 2 colorless mana for a 2/1 changeling. You can filter your mana once each turn. So this is obviously worse than Mana Worker, because Mana Worker was a 1... I know this is a shape-shifting changeling, so it does, like, the stuff. But, yeah, I think that is not as important as, like, having the right power and toughness. And this thing just kind of dies. There's just better ways to fix your mana, I think, than this. You could play it, and it wouldn't be a disaster, but I'm going to probably never play it. But, like, it's not in tier 5. Fabled Passage. It's a reprint. Sacrifice it, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. If you control 4 or more lands, untap it. So, solves a lot of your tapped land problems in the late game. Great. Yeah, I mean, it's good fixing, right? Good fixing, basically untapped fixing. Not necessarily untapped all the time, but you can either play it on turn 1 or turn 4. And, like, the only times where it's not untapped is, like, because, like, turn 1 and finding a tap land is usually not that big of a cost. So either it's in your opening hand or it's your 4th land in a lot of cases. So it is pretty close to untapped fixing. Fountain Port. It is a land that taps for colorless mana. You can pay 2 and sacrifice a token to draw a card. You can pay 3 and pay 1 life to create a blue fish token. And you can pay 4 and tap it to create a treasure token. So this is like Trading Post on a land, which is very good. The problem is that it only taps for colorless mana. So I think you could play like one of these, and obviously it's a rare, so you're not really ever going to have more than one, but sometimes I'm sure it will happen. The problem is there aren't duels in this set. There's fixing, but there aren't dual lands, which is a little bit of a distinction, because dual lands make it a lot easier, even than like lands that like Fabled Passage, for example, is not a dual land. It fixes for 2 colors of mana, but is not a dual land. Colorless lands really get hurt by cards like Fabled Passage that make you choose early in the game which type of land you're getting, because it doesn't have as much flexibility. Like, colorless lands really hurt your flexibility. They don't necessarily hurt your, like, ability to cast your first spell. A lot of the cost is the ability to cast your second spell with that color in a turn. So I think this is probably worth playing the first copy of, but I don't think you should prioritize it so highly, because again, like the decks that want this are slower decks, and yeah, I think it's fine. I think it's fine. It's cool. It's a sweet design. I don't know. I just feel like it's too slow. Grotto Gaming. Hidden Grotto. When it enters the battlefield, surveil 1, taps for colorless, and you can tap 1 to add mana of any color. Worse than the one in OTJ, because it is not a desert, and there were things that cared about deserts and fetch deserts. Still a fine playable land. Still a good fixer. The surveil 1 makes it get in there. Not a super high priority. You can take it middle of the pack. But you can play 1 in pretty much any deck and not feel too bad about it. Should you play more than 1 in most of your decks? Probably no. So that's tier 3. And now we get into this cycle. Lilypad Village. So it's a land that taps for colorless or blue, but you can only spend the blue to cast a creature spell. And you can pay blue and tap it to surveil 2. Activate only if one of the bird, frog, otter, or rat entered the battlefield under your control this turn. And which is probably only as a sorcery, but maybe not. So it's basically 2 mana to surveil 2. Okay, fine, that's a decent thing to do. Tap it to add blue and tap to spend only to cast a creature spell. Blue is hurt by only being able to cast creature spells more than probably any other color, so I don't think this one is particularly great. You can't play like more, so it's like you're fighting, like you can probably play this in any blue deck. The first copy you can probably play in any blue deck. It depends on how many spells you have, but you can probably play one. If the second copy starts getting a little touch, like it starts not being very good, so that's kind of how I feel about this one. Lupin Flower Village. It is a land that taps for colorless or white, but only to cast a creature spell. And you can pay 1 and a white and sacrifice it. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a bat, bird, mouse, or rabbit card from among them, put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, it's a land that taps for creatures. White generally plays a lot more creatures than blue, for example, so it's not as bad. And the buyout clause is actually really good. It's an ability to draw cards later on in the game, and that seems pretty good to me. This seems like a better land than the blue one. Mud Flat Village. 1, so it taps for a colorless or a black, only to spend creatures, and you can pay 1 and a black and sacrifice it, and tap it to sacrifice it. Return a bat, lizard, rat, or squirrel card from your graveyard to your hand. I think this is the best one for a couple of reasons. One, again, the black plays a lot of creatures, so you should be able to put this into your deck with no problems. This one I would probably play 2 of. I don't know. Again, they do have diminishing returns for sure. But yeah, I mean, just recurring something from your graveyard is even better than getting it from your deck, because you know that it's there and you're going to get it. Whereas the one that gets your deck still, I think, is very good because it's 6 cards and pretty much every single one, like at least 60% of your creatures are going to fall into that category, and your deck is more than half creatures, so, or not more, is about 35% creatures or something. So, like, yeah, that's just going to hit so often. At least something. Whereas this is going to hit 100% of the time, pretty much, which is really nice. Oak Hollow Village. So, the green version of the cycle. And you can pay, it has its abilities that you can pay green and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each frog, rabbit, raccoon, or squirrel you control to enter the battlefield this turn. So, it costs 2 mana again, so this and another mana, so it's 2 total mana to put to do the counter on everything that entered this turn. I think that's pretty weak, but it's a nice upside. Green is probably the least hurt by creatures only, but still does get hurt by it, and I think this one might have the most, like, this is the lowest impact and like highest level of diminishing returns, where you can't really do this with a second copy of this is not really very good. So I don't think it's as high of a priority. Rockface Village is a land that taps for colorless or red. Obviously, it's the red version, and you can pay red and tap it. Target lizard, mouse, otter, or raccoon gets +1/+1/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. And you activate only as a sorcery. This is nice upside. I think, again, not similar to the green one where there's diminishing returns and red cares a little bit more about spells than green does. I think this effect is a little bit better than the green effect. I don't know. It's like kind of Arena Ogre-esque. You never really played that card, but this one seems like it's just fine, medium. Like, I could even move this one down to another tier. Like, it's just medium upside. You'll probably play it in your red decks, but probably not super excited about taking it highly. 3-Tree City. As it enters, choose a creature type. You can tap to add a colorless mana, or you can pay 2 and tap it to choose a color, add an amount of mana of that color equal to the number of creatures of the chosen type. So, to break even on this, you have to have 3 creatures of the type, right? Because you're tapping 3 lands to do that. That's not going to happen very often. And then if you have 4, you get 1 extra mana. So, to me, that seems like not worth it. That just seems like a not super worth it card. And yeah, it's just really hard to keep 4 creatures of the same type on the battlefield at the same time. It's going to be easier in this set than in most sets. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy, though. Uncharted Haven. We've seen this before. It enters tapped. As it enters, choose a color. Add 1 mana to the chosen color. Very solid fixing. Good if you want fixing. you'll play this in any deck. First copy, probably first 2 copies, you'll play it in any deck. Beyond that, not super high priority. If you want to play if you want to play 3 colors, gotta play it. If you don't have to play it. And that's it. That's all the lands. That's all the colorless cards, all the lands. Some interesting stuff in there this time. There's not always, as much interesting stuff. There's a lot of like uncommons in the colorless section that I'm like that have piqued my interest. Not always true. If you enjoyed, feel free to check out the other set review videos for this set, and I'll see you next time.